How do we reach the lost? How do we reach those who are far from God's glory and far from his salvation? Are they too far gone, or is there hope? And what strategies can we use to bring people into his kingdom? Let's talk about it in this video. In the northern part of Queensland in Australia, there is sugar canes. Now, if you've ever seen sugar canes, if you see them, pictures of them at full growth, you will see how much they tower. They tower over the harvesters. But when they're in their early days of growth, they're incredibly small, as you would expect. And the growing process takes about 9 to 18 months, with a ratoon crop being able to be harvested for up to 6 years before being harvested. Now, a ratoon, what is a ratoon? I didn't know this concept either before I looked it up. So a ratoon, so to speak, it's a new shoot or sprout that springs from the base of the crop, and especially in sugar canes and especially after cropping. And new shoots actually grow from buds on this billet to grow successfully. And then the sugar cane to grow needs strong sunlight. It needs soil, fertile soil, and sufficient water. And throughout the growing process, crops must be monitored for pests and diseases. How much does this sort of mirror the spiritual world when we are talking about harvesting or sowing the gospel into people's lives? It is about that fertile soil, sufficient watering of it, and sufficient sunlight, so to speak. And that's what happens is we've got to sow into people's lives. God does the growth, of course. It's not anything that we do, but we just need to be faithful. And we need to believe that when we sow into people's lives, when we sow into our towns, our cities, whatever it might be, that we just need to sow and then God will bring the increase. Like it says in Matthew, where it will grow and the harvest will grow 100-fold. 40-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. And this verse in 1 Corinthians 3 verse 7 says, "So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God gives the growth." So how do we sow that seed? So one of the big verses that I love, it's a great parable in Mark 4, 1-9, and it's a very famous parable in the Bible. And it says this in verse 3, "Listen, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell among the path, and the birds came and devoured it. Other seed fell on rocky ground, where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprung up, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. And other seeds fell into the good soil, and produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. And he said, He who has ears to hear, let him hear." That's a beautiful representation of what happens when the seed gets into people's hearts. Sometimes people just lose their joy immediately, or the troubles of the world choke the joy that they once had. But what we need to do is we're responsible for sowing into people's lives. And as I said, we can't control what happens. Some people might wither away immediately. Others, again, will fall away with the worries of the world. But if we continue to disciple people and speak into people's lives, it most likely will fall into the latter category, where it is on good soil. Now, as sowers of the seed, we need to be uncompromising in the Word of God. We need to disciple the people in the right way of living, and not be afraid to call them out when they're doing the wrong thing. We need to tell people about God's plan of redemption for their lives, what he did on the cross, that Jesus is the only way. And we need to show people that there is freedom in the relationship with Jesus. And the seed is the word of God, as it says in Luke 8:11. Now, sometimes you might be in uncompromising terrain, a hard town with people who have no interest in God. But despite these adversities, some of the seed will land on good soil. Despite any opposition or struggle with discipleship, the harvest actually eventually comes, and we'll see the power of that come through Jesus Christ. Now, I was catching up with a pastor friend of mine, and he told me this story about this missionary. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an incredible, powerful story, regardless of whether it is true or not. But there was a missionary in this country, and he was, I'm not sure where, it was a foreign country somewhere, and he was serving. God called him to go, and he went. And he was constantly sowing seed in this town, and working really hard in the ministry, as were his wife and kids. And just, there was no results. They were not seeing anything. But he persevered anyway. But then during this time, his wife died. And again, thought about giving up, but kept going. And then eventually his kids died. And then he really thought about giving up then. And that would have been unimaginable pain and grief. I couldn't imagine that myself. But he felt like God was saying to continue. And he did. He continued. But then he also died. Now, in the natural, it looked like nothing had happened. He died, his whole family died, and there was no results. Nothing worked in the kingdom. But guess what? It was not in vain. Because not long after he died, revival sparked in the entire town, and nearly everybody in that town was saved. Now, he didn't get an earthly reward, but he would have got a massive reward in heaven for what happened. And that was nothing that he did in his own strength. That was all God. And it says in Ecclesiastes 11:6, "Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well." And like that example, we may never see the results of what we sow. We may never see the reward of it this side of heaven, but we still serve, we still sow, and we serve because God tells us to serve, wherever that might be. It might be where you are. You might be getting told to go to a new town, a new place, wherever it might be, a new type of people, a new prison ministry, whatever it is. You might not ever see this reward in this lifetime, and that's okay. Continue to sow the seed. Continue to sow into people's lives. Continue to share the love of Jesus Christ. And let God bring the harvest. So that's my thoughts on first part of evangelism. I'll do more videos in this series, but that's just my thoughts on how we can sow the seed. That's just the first step, is to sow that seed. Sow the seed of the joy that Christ has brought to your life, the joy that he's brought through his salvation. So thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, just give it a like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I've also started a Patreon. You can look at the link in the description below, and if you feel like giving to this channel and helping it grow that way, you can do that as well, but otherwise you can still enjoy free content. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.